Okay, guys, just like we looked at life in the North in chapter 14, section 2, we're going to look at life in the South in 14.4. In addition to this tutorial, this mini lecture that I've created, you are also going to have some pretty cool videos linked on your Schoology page that relate to 14.4 in addition to your Quizlet words as well. They will be there for you to study as well. Let's take a look at 14.4 first. The vocab, there are 3 terms that you'll need to be familiar with. They all appear here as well. First term is cottonocracy, right here. Cottonocracy are the wealthy families in the South whose money came from the production of cotton. Second term is slave codes. We've seen this before. The slave codes were laws that were meant to keep enslaved African Americans from running away or rebelling. And the third word, again, a word we saw earlier in the year, extended family, is a family unit in which several generations live together. Taking a look at our reading here on life in the South, let's take a peek here. Southern society was made up of 5 main groups, and they are posted down here in the diagram. You've got the group at the top, owners of 5 or more slaves, who make up the small group at the very top of the pyramid. You've got owners of between 1 and 4 slaves make up the second group. You've got the next group, whites who own no slaves, which comprise the largest group. Fourth group are free African Americans, which only make up about 2% of Southerners in 1860. And the last group, the fifth group, are enslaved African Americans who make up about 1/3 of Southerners in 1860. So back to the reading, Southern society was made up of 5 main groups we just went over. Planters were the smallest group in number, but they had the most influence. Planters were wealthy plantation owners, okay? They were called the cottonocracy, and they made large fortunes growing cotton and other crops with slave labor. Small farmers were the largest group. Some small farmers owned a few slaves. Poor whites owned neither land nor slaves, okay? Free African Americans in the South lived under harsh laws. For example, they were not allowed to vote or travel. Enslaved African Americans made up 1/3 of the population in the South. Again, looking at the diagram, the largest population of African Americans would be the third, or roughly 1/3, about 32% of enslaved African Americans. They would make up the 1/3 of the population in the South. Most worked in the fields, clearing land and planting and harvesting crops. Some slaves worked at skilled jobs such as carpentry. Others worked as house servants. And we learned a lot about those different classes of slaves during our reading of Frederick Douglass's autobiography. Moving on, slaves worked long hours, as we know, usually under harsh conditions. Sometimes families were separated. Strict laws called slave codes made it illegal for slaves to learn to read or to write or to own guns. Enslaved people tried to ease the hardships of slavery. They struggled to keep their families together. On large plantations, extended families could stay together. And they also kept some African traditions, and many slaves, overwhelming majority of slaves, drew hope from Christianity. As we talked about in class, many slaves relied on their faith. They relied on their Christian faith to provide comfort and hope that one day they would be delivered from the bonds of slavery. They would be delivered to freedom, and they held on to those very strong religious beliefs and were able to find faith and comfort with those beliefs. African Americans resisted slavery in many ways. Many attempted to escape. Only a few succeeded. Some people, like Nat Turner in 1831, organized violent rebellions against slavery. There will be a video posted on the Schoology page related to Nat Turner's attempt at escaping. However, rebellions were not common. And the reason rebellions were not common is because white slave owners and plantation workers had firearms that usually would ensure that rebellions and attempts at escape would not be successful. White planters were so powerful that slave revolts had almost no chance of success. It's not to say that they didn't happen. There were attempted slave revolts, but most of them were put down. We're going to see as I said, an interesting story of Nat Turner as well. There are 2 questions at the bottom of the reading. As you see, most of our reading worksheets have a couple of questions. First question here is, what were some ways African Americans struggled against slavery? And the diagram question, what percentage of people in the South were enslaved? Make sure you look at the diagram very, very closely before you answer that question. What percentage of people in the South were enslaved? And what percentage were whites who owned no slaves? Please answer both questions on a separate sheet of paper, or you can answer them in a Google Doc. Also, be sure to check your vocab, which I've linked on the Schoology page, and be sure to look at the videos that support this lesson on the Cotton Kingdom in the South. Have a great day, and we'll see you in our next video.